Welcome back, Rabbi Dr. Eliezer Brut, to another episode of History of How They Learned Gemara Throughout the Generations. This was our original series. We are about to start on Masechta Shevuos, a special privilege we have because we had you on just 3 weeks ago from Masechtas Makis, and here we are about to start Masechta Shevuos. And actually, there are many people who actually learn Masechta Shevuos. It's 49 dafim during the 49 days of Sfiras Ha'omer. I think Rabbi Brut will talk about this. We also have a special sponsor dedicating this episode, and we will let Rabbi Brut introduce the sponsor all on his own. Rabbi Brut, how are you today?
Baruch Hashem. Okay, so I've undertaken to sponsor this episode myself. It has been produced entirely as a labor of love, dedicating to explore how Masechta Shevuos has been studied throughout the generations. The preparation of this shiur requires many hours of meticulous research among rare and obscure svarim. Recognizing that sponsoring an entire episode or even half of one is not always feasible, a new method has been created to allow listeners to access significantly more content while also offering a small amount of support for this endeavor, whether on a monthly basis or even just occasionally. Episodes can be accessed under the umbrella title Musings of a Book Collector. This is all besides all the material that's on AllDaf. Information on how to sign up for various options can be found at eliezerbrut.com. There you can learn how to access free episodes which are released several times a month, as well as premium content, including episodes from different series available behind a paywall to members. I would like to highlight a newly launched series besides the other series that we have going, titled Paths of Psak, Inside the Mishnah Berurah and Aruch HaShulchan. This series explores two of the most influential halachic works of the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Through a close comparison of the Mishnah Berurah and the Aruch HaShulchan, we delve into their historical context, the rabbinic libraries they drew upon, and their distinct methodological approaches each posek employed in shaping halacha. Okay, without further ado, back to our regular program schedule, Masechta Shevuos. So learners of Daf Yomi, we find ourselves starting this Masechta in the middle of Sfira. A lot of times people like to find something happening with the event that something happened that week when we're starting this and this Masechta. Here it was great. Basically is that the Reb Chaim Palat, one of the Talmidim Muvhakim of the Chassam Sofer, who, when he lists out on Haggis of the Seder HaYom and the Chassam Sofer, he writes that the whole year between Mincha and Ma'ariv he gave a shiur to his Talmidim, and what was the topic between Pesach and Atzeres? He would learn Masechta Shevuos completely and finished it. And there's an interesting passage in the Tshuvas Chassam Sofer, Even Ezer, Simon Kuf, and he says as Kizeli Shleishim Shana, that I had this question, and B'chol Shana B'limdi Shevuos im Talmidim, I mentioned this kasha, and what I answered in Tshuvas Taf Kuf Ayin, in the Shana of Taf Kuf Ayin Daled. So basically, here we have him talking about this minig that every year he will learn Shevuos in this period of time. His Talmud, Ramash, in Zichron Yehuda, they record that he also himself will learn during Sfiras Ha'omer, Masechta Shevuos every day, and he will be Messiah on Shevuos. Interestingly enough, the Ramash writes about his Shver, who we're going to be discussing soon, the Baal Oyele David, who was very close with the Chassam Sofer. So he also had this minhag independently, and he writes in a tshuva about a kasha that he had. And we looked up in his sefer to see if he handles this in this question of Masechta Shevuos, and he l'maisa didn't. Anyway, so this is a minhag found in the Beis Medrash of the Chassam Sofer and others, as mentioned, and went down to Ramash to learn the whole Masechta Shevuos during this period of time. Okay, and one could see a little bit more about this in the Gevaldige Chibur Elef Ksav, Volume 1, page 92 and page 62. But kids are back. So number one is there's a Merdika Skula to learn Masechta Shevuos during this period of time. So it's great that we're starting in the middle of Shevuos. Number two, a middle of Sfira. So now we go to the regular discussion throughout where we discuss the Gemara. What's there out there on the Gemara, the Nusach HaGemara? So still on this Masechta we have the Gdukei Seifrim, and on the third parak there's a work from Moshe Benovitz, more academic slant. Shvuos, making a Shvua and understanding it with the background in Tkufas Chazal. There's an excellent chapter in Shol Lieberman's work, Greek and Jewish Palestine, where he explains, based on understanding the historical time period, what it meant to Shvua. It was very common to that people, the Hamaratzim for sure, they spoke in their regular language with using this term. And he also deals with a very big question that many try to understand: what exactly is the difference between Nedarim and Shevuos? And it's a very big shame, because the way it is that Nedarim, we learned quite a while ago, there was a big break between this and Shevuos, so it makes it hard. But a lot of times people keep in mind, try to understand what exactly Nedarim and Shevuos, what is the difference. Anyway, I always begin an episode quoting from the Chida. Chida lists out in various Masechtas what the literature on the Masechta is. So in this Masechta, he says, there's Rimagash, Ramban, Rajba, that was published in his time, Taisis Rosh, Ritva, Chedusha Iran, and the Nemuke Yosef. The kids are a nice amount of Rishonim. So, and if you compare it to some other Masechtas, especially in his lists, you'll see this is a very rich Masechta. What's also ironic is that when Daf Yomi began Nedarim, we spoke about that there's even Messiahs that said people that Rishonim didn't learn Masechtas Nedarim for various reasons, and it's quite the opposite. We're going to see the Rishonim mamish plugged away in Masechta Shevuos. So let's begin. We always begin with the Ga'inim. So the Eitze Ga'inim from Bam Levine, which we always quote, he didn't get up to Masechta Shevuos, but Baruch Hashem, now generation, a lot of material, the volumes of Eitze Ga'inim have been continued by Rechmiel Brody, Professor Dr. Tzvi Stamfer, and others, and they put out a volume which has a lot of the material that they collected, and putting out a volume of Eitze Ga'inim on this Masechta. Okay, right away, we'll go a drop out of order. There's Rishonim. We just saw the list of the Chida. So continuing with the Ga'inim, we're going to see, and the Rishonim all bring this down. There's a work from Rav Hai Gaon. Rav Hai Gaon dies in 1038, called Mishpatei Shevuos. Now this work the Rishonim had and use. And there's long lists of how many times they quote it. But B'kitzur, when does it come first? For me, I am always focusing on the print. So it's published the first time in 1602. In the same volume with a Mekach Memkar, which is another work of the Ga'inim, which we spoke about a little bit, and the Brais Demlechas HaMishkan, which we spoke about in the episodes of Chaim Kanievsky in the Mishkan. And this came from a Ksav Yad that was in the house of the Ramam Mipano. Okay, now the Madir made sure to do a good job. Okay, fine. Lamaisa, fast forward 1782. It's quite a period of time. It's basically reprinted, identical from the same manuscript. And it has, the only difference is it has Askama from Rebbe Fall Katz, the Baal Tyrus Yikasil. Fine. It's clear that Rebbe Avram ben Agra and the Gra, they had this chibur. The Gra used it in Bir Gra, at least for Mekach Memkar, and the Baal Seder Mishnah. Recently, I saw an auction. They auctioned off and was sold the 1602 edition of the Baal Seder Mishnah, who was also in this Tkufa. Fast forward again, many years, and 1960, there's an edition that comes out from Reb Shimon Diskin, and then there's an edition that comes out from Rav Dam. And this Rav Dam, he spent a lot of time working on it. He tracked down more manuscripts, and he tracked down Targumim, because you have to understand, Mishpatei Shevuos of Rav Hai was written in Arabic. And then it was translated into Hebrew. And we'll see who the translator is shortly. It's going to play out shortly. But Kitzur, also worth mentioning is this Rav Guzik located what was published already in the 1880s from the library of Shlomo Zalman Halberstam, who had published it. The two other works in Lashonos of Shir, let me say in song-like, halachas of Hilchos Shvua. Now, and so he publishes it. He published it in journals first. It could later be found in Tyrus and Shagainim, and then in his edition of the Mishpatei Shevuos, it could be found there. Now, one point just to make over here briefly is why Vasepis. It's in this. Why is it in Lashon of Shir? Very simple, because they wanted. We find charuzim and halacha was found in the times of the Middle Ages. Rishonim made different charuzim similar to make it that people could remember the halachas, a memory thing. So the halachas were very brief, and people remember songs much better than a whole chibur. So it was bekitzer the halachas of Shvua, because it's very important, very relevant, and already Rav Hai Gaon wrote this, and they exist, and he has a whole parish about them. Okay, fine. There's one other edition. Is from Professor Shraga Abramson. Was published a few years ago, and what Shraga Abramson, who worked on this chibur for many years, collecting from all the pieces in the Kairag Niza, adding to whatever existed. As I said, it was only in 1602 that was published, of pieces that they found located proving it's Rav Haigaim, and he was always planning on putting out a fancy edition with footnotes. Lamaisa, he did not. He left behind drafts. His Talmidim, after working on it for a very long time, put it out. Lamaisa, there was criticism about the way the edition came out in a Hamayana issue, which I'm more than happy to share. Okay, just fast forward to our generation. This is all happening in our generation, but one person, obviously, Eliezer Brat's going to say it was fond of using, at least I noticed a bunch of times, him using for his work on the Rambam, is using the Mishpatei Shevuos, and that is Reb Chaim Kanievsky in his work Kiryat Melech. Okay, so here we have the importance of having a Gaonic work. Now, it happens to be that the Mishpatei Shevuos is very important when one learns Masechta Shevuos. We go fast forward. There's another work, and this work, if you open up the 1521, in 1521, everyone knows the Shas was published. There's different when it's published first time. It's one of the earliest editions of Shas, the Bromberg edition. But Kitzer, what about the Rif? You have a Rif in the back of your Gemara. When did it get there? So Kitzer, in 1521, Bromberg went ahead and published independently a few volumes of the Rif with other materials. In the back of this volume, he has a Chibur, and he calls it, he says, sorry, one second. Let me just quote. Shari Shevuos, from that he's publishing Hagoin Reb Yitzchak ben Harav Ruven Yostam, that he's now. Then he said, then underneath that there's a line that says Hamachune Rav Alphas, and then there's a whole piece, a nice poem, and then it says at the end that who did this, Yitzchak ben Ruven. Okay. So what's interesting is it sounds like this is and it makes sense why it would be put in the back of this Rif. Very simple, because the Rif, this is a chibur of the Rif in a form of sha'arim, a bunch of sha'arim that it has. So basically there's a chibur called Shari Shevuos, already published in 1521. So it's not the same as the Mishpatei Shevuos. They argue a lot, but another chibur. And who is it? Who's the author? Sounds like at this point in time the Rif. In 1593, it's published again, and there in the Shar, it sounds like already it's not so simple that it's the Rif, and it has a few lashonos suggesting that it might not be the Rif because it's Stiris. So who is it? It might be an anical of the Rif. Fine. And others, Ben Yaakov and Yitzhak others go with that. Lamaisa, the Shach, in his Chibur Takvikayin, says he doesn't believe in Simon Yud. He handles about the Rif. He has a steer between this Chibur and the Rif, and he says it must be that it's not. It must be Rif Acher, or maybe there's a steer, or maybe he wrote it when he was young and he changed his mind. So this is what the Shach says in Simon Yud. So they were already ma'orer that there's something going on over here. Now, in this period of time, there was a Yid. His name was Rabbi Yitzchak ben Ruven HaBartzaloni. He was a tremendous Talmid Chacham, and you have to. This is all taking place Seif Kufas Haga'onim. He's a contemporary of the Rif. Rif dies in 1103 to give us some context. So this is a little bit after of Haigain, and this. Rabbi Yitzchak ben Ruven, besides being his own independent Talmid Chacham, so he's famous. He wrote Azaros. Azaros says we're coming up to the Chag Shevuos with the Taryag Mitzvahs. And Bekitzer, this Rabbi Yitzchak, he was also a translator, so he knew Arabic. So he translates them. It turns out the Mishpatei Shevuos that was from Rav Haigain, he translates into Hebrew. Turns out this Chibur Shari Shevuos also was written in Arabic. And who does the translation? It's most likely the same Rabbi Yitzchak Bartzaloni. So he does a lot of translating in the Sugya of Masechta Shevuos. Fine. The story doesn't end there. Just mamish in the past year, a work comes out called HaSefer HaKoilel Reb David ben Yitzadya. A massive chibur. Also based on massive amounts of discoveries from the Kairag Niza. And here we have a whole chibur, a lost chibur mamish from a Yid from this same Tkufa. It's published by Tzvi Stamfer and David Sklier and others. And at the end of this chibur, they publish a doctorate of Professor Shagar Avramson, who we just mentioned, that he submitted to Shol Libra and was never published. And who is the Jew, the Yid, that he works on? A Yid, his name was Rav David ben Rasadia. A Rishon from Mamish, also this period of time. Mamish, the same, Mamish, a little younger then the Rif, the Rabbi Chananel, and the Mishpatei Shavuos. The Kitzer, so Abramson proves who's the mechaber of the Shari Shavuos that's in the back of that Bamberg printed that some people thought it's the Rif. It turns out it's this Reb David ben Sadia. Now, what's interesting is the Rishonim, already in the times of the Rishonim, 100 years after this Reb David ben Sadia's Chibur was out, there was confusion. The Rav Yah already thought that the Shari Shavuos is the Rif. And there's a whole long list of people, what they thought. We're not going to get into it. One could see in this material found in the Sefer Kailul. Stamfer in his Agdama also deals with it. Abramson over there. Abramson in an article in Simon in Sinai Kufdal, in Sinai Shana Kufdal also has an article about this. But the point is, what's fascinating is like this. This Rabbi Yitzchak ben Ruvain is not the Rif. It's not the grandson of the Rif. He's a Metargim, and he translates both works. And the other person was Reb David ben Sadia. And basically, is this Reb David ben Sadia? He was known at the times of Rishonim as they bring all the documentation about him, and he was forgotten about. And his whole Chibur Shari Shavuos, which is published in 1521, someone mistakenly gave it the wrong name, and from then on, it was forgotten about. So maybe David b'Shem Amra, you have to declare when people say over Torah from him, is his Sfas of Davis Bekever or not? Because is the Rif getting this Sfas of Davis Bekever? Who's getting this Sfas of Davis Bekever? Bottom line is, what's even more fascinating is as follows. The Rif was a tremendous bar plukta on this Reb David ben Sadia, and he was very anti the Chibur Shari Shavuos of this Reb David ben Sadia. But Kitzer, this is a fascinating discussion, and what's relevant is all these chiburim are now available for someone who wants to learn Masechta Shavuos. We have tons of new material of Gaonika material, and it's a shame is this Shrag Avramson worked many years. He did a lot. He discovered a lot through the Kayagniza and everything. And this Masechta Shavuos, which he spent so much time, Lamaisa's material did not come to light properly. Only now some of it's come to light, and hopefully, Amir Hashem, the Shari Shavuos, another edition is going to come out. But just to conclude over here is like this. So the Rif also, as I said, was a bar plucked of him. Fast forward 1792. So 1792, they didn't know all what I just told you. This is all mamish new discoveries. 1792, they're still working. Is it the Rif? It's not the Rif. So Chashav Yid, Reb Yoav, son of Reb Yirmiyah, who dies in 1810. The Chassam Sofer was masbered him. He was a Rav, amongst other places, Tselim in Hungary, and he writes a massive Be'iyun Chibur, Be'iyun Gadol, on the Sefer Shari Shavuos. So the Mishpatei Shavuos never was Zeicha, of Reb Hai never was Zeicha to get a proper work until recently, but even then it still needs a lot of work. But this Chibur that we said we did, that they weren't sure who it is, they thought maybe it's the Rif. And Lamasha, if you look at that skama of Ramar Tchabanet, a beautiful skama that he gives to this Rabbi Yoav, he says, he rather calls it the Rif. Others, the whole time they're handling, they say it's miyuchas to the Rif. Anyway, bottom line is this Rabbi Yoav, he writes this Gevaldige Pirish, and that's in 1792. It must have made a little bit of a rash. A few people use it, but I don't know how many people use it. Maisa, a few years ago, Mechon Zichron Aaron prints a massive edition of this work, and since then, there's, just to mention, there's a Yid Reb David Flinik. He publishes an edition of Shari Shavuos that's available. There's another edition. But bottom line is, we have over here something which you don't really have in other places. There's a Shari Shavuos, which existed since in print, at least since 1521. Rishonim had it. They just didn't know who it is. And this is another massive chibur, which helps us to understand this Masechta. Now, and just to conclude, over here is the Pechlal, Shavuos, and the Rif also, there's tons of tshuvas that deal with Shavuos. And the question is why. So this also, I refer you to a massive article from Yisrael Tashman in his work, Halacha Minigum Metzias Ba'ashkenaz, where he tries to understand Vas Epis in the times of the Gainim. There's so much work and so much material, and the next generation, the Saif Yam of the Saif Tkufas Againim and the Rif, and all these people, why they saw Eiskin Shvu, why was it so relevant then? And he has some theories which are worth to explore. Continuing with this Nakuda, in previous Masechtas we mentioned, but we don't have him too often, the Rimigash, the great Rimigash. So we also have him on what Masechta? On Masechta Shavuos. The Meiri spells out that one of the Masechtas was Zeicha to have the Rimigash on. So in the Seder Kabbalah, he says, is on Masechta Shavuos and Masechtas Baba Basra, which in Masechtas Baba Basra we spoke about this. It was first published in 1758. And then again, it's published in 1826. In the back of the 1826 edition is Chuvas of the Chassam Sofer published. This is in the Chassam Sofer's lifetime. The Chassam Sofer was against publishing his material. It seems he allowed it in the end. It could be, but there's a lashon that sounds like in the beginning he wasn't happy, but then when it came out, he was happy. So there's a few Chuvas that were published in his lifetime. This is the address where it was from. Okay. Kiyadua, the Rimigash, I've quoted in the past. The Rambam writes in Zagdam to Mishnayis, unbelievable Shainis. He writes something like, "Betalmid mafliya kol mi shemizbainin bedvarav aimek yunai ache efshali loimer olav lefanav lo yahaya melech kamayu b'shitasai." My ridiculous Shainis about him. Famous question that people always ask, is he the Talmud of the Rimigash? Because a lot of people say he is. It's clear, says the Hamaspik, Rabbi Avram ben Arambam, the Hamaspik, Maduras Dana, that he's not a Talmud of him, but he calls himself a Talmud sometimes because his father was a Talmud, but he was not a Talmud, and chronologically it's very hard to say that. Okay. Anyway, point is, so we have a Rimigash, so this is right to the base medrash of the Rif. Going forward is the Ilum of Chachmei Svarad, similar from all these places. So do we have more? Yes. Ramban, we have a Iyun de Chibur of the Ramban, not a fragmented piece, a massive Chibur of the Ramban. Of course, it's published very late. It's only published in 1791, which goes into my theme that in the times of the Achronim, they didn't have the Rishonim, but the Rishonim clearly learned this Masechta. Fast forward our generation, Mechon Talmud Yisraeli, he publishes a complete edition based on 8 manuscripts. So kids are today, if someone wants to learn the Masechta, we're already seeing there's unbelievable amounts of new material. The Rashba. So again, it's published the first time in 1729. So that means the first Kufa of Achronim did not have it. In 1965, Rabbi Avram Sefer, we've mentioned him a bunch of times, he finds more material. He believes it's the Rashba, and he publishes it. Lamaisa, later on, Meister of Cook edition, they believe it's not the Rashba. It might be related to the Rashba. Okay, so they publish based on manuscripts what they believe is the Rashba, more information. Okay. Fast forward, who else do we have? Everyone knows the Ritva. Again, when is the Ritva published? Also, the first time is late in the game. Now, interestingly enough, on certain Masechtas we have that they knew that the Ritva, he had a few Maduras. So in this Masechtas Kedushin, it's clear, Shol Liebman wrote an article that in 1935, he bought a Ritva Madura Rishona. Okay? And it's housed in JTS. Now, he bought it. At the time, he says in a footnote in the article that the famous Meicher Svarim, Ramichel Rabinovich, who was a great Baki in Svarim also, told him that the Yad Yehuda on Masechta Shevuos quotes a Ksav Yad of this Ritva that Lieberman ended up buying. I heard stories also of this legendary Michal Rabinovich, who is a Meirdika expert in Litvish history. I heard from Reb Shmuel Ashkenazi. He used to also frequent there. Actually, a story with him that he met Shol Lieberman shopping in that store. But the point is that this Chibur, Yad Yehuda, which we'll see shortly when it's published, he had the Ksav Yad of what's called what Lieberman's calling the Madur Rishon of the Masechta. L'maisa, the Meister of Cook edition, they seem told it's not. Bottom line is, Meister of Cook publishes the Ritva based on many different Kisviyad that they have, and we move on to the Miri. Miri is published again when? In our generation. So you see this Masechta is very rich in Rishonim. Professor Eliezer Horowitz publishes a Talmud of the Ramban called Rav Kreskras. The Ran is published early on, but again, Meister of Cook comes over here and publishes based on many manuscripts the work of the Ran. Okay, so again, we're seeing this theme that I like to say, the Rishonim, our generation is blessed, we're getting many Rishonim. Just to point out that a cute thing, I'm very fond of these type of things, in the Meister Cook edition, so Rav David Metzger points in the back that he prints some ha'aris, a few pages of this Reb Chaim Yoina Tumim. Who's Reb Chaim Yoina Tumim? He was the son-in-law, a great genius, who was the son-in-law of Rav David Oppenheim, and we spoke about him in Masechta Sanhedrin. And so it turns out that in the work that they published of his a bunch of years ago, they didn't know that in the back of one edition of Masechta Shevuos, 1724, there's about 7 pages of Torah of this great Gaon on Masechta Shevuos. What's shot in this Masechta, why it was published, because there was no Shas published in that year, and why punkti 7 pages, I've yet to understand. But if someone wants those rare 7 pages, I'll be more than happy to send them to him. And Metzger was the one, I don't know how Metzger came to them, it's very strange, but he got to it. Okay, so I just feel that once I came across it, I have to share such an akuda. Weiter, the Taisus Rush, again, Api Kisveyad, and then Meister of Cook claims to have more Kisveyad, fine. And the last Rishon of to mention over here is the Muki Yosef, also that was discovered, and that was the end of the list of the Chida. So now, so Bekitzer, what we're seeing over here is there's a crazy amount of information already, starting from the Seif Ga'inim and the Rishonim galore. Someone wants to sit down and learn this Masech to be, and there's plenty what to do. What happens as we move on? So the Shita Kobetzes, interestingly enough, they discovered manuscript material of a Talmud of the Shittim Kobetzes, and the Kairagniz Eliezer Horowitz located some materials of the Shittim Kobetzes on this Masechta, but where is it published? In the Shittim Kobetzes on Chulin, published by Havat Shalom. This was subject to Din Torah between them and Ofek, beyond my pay grade to know what went on over there. But bottom line is, the materials can be found in the Shittim Kobetzes of Havat Shalom on, we say not only on Chulin, but materials on Shevuos. Now we're moving further on into Tkufas Achrayim. There's a Yid Moshe Kazis, a great gadol from Chachmei Italia. Chida writes about him very nicely. He was a known gadol that period of time. He wrote his chibur without. We mentioned him, I believe, in the episode of the Mishkan Kalim stuff, and because he also wrote a chibur relating to that. He was mamish in the time when in Italy they didn't have Shas because of the Gzeira. So he's writing from memory. But Kitzur Mechon Shleim publishes his work also on Masechta Shevuos. Fast forward, Taurus Chaim, I've spoken about him in the past, the Gevaldige Chibur. So he has a Chibur on Masechta Shevuos, Kol Shelo Masechta, mostly not noted by most people. I did note that the Netzivim Rami Sada quotes it, and of Mirz Hashem, I still hope one day to give a whole episode devoted to the Chashivas Bechlal of the Taurus Chaim. Pnei Yeshua, there's a little bit material of his. Okay, now we move on to a few more pieces of information to conclude, and that's number one. Reb David Deitch. Reb David Deitch, we've spoken about him in some other episodes. So he wrote a Chibur Oyel David. So just recently, in 2024, Mechon Shem Oilam published an edition of his Chibur on Masechta Shevuos, Seder Nezikin, and materials of his on Haggadah and Torah. Not his Chibur and Yavamis, Kinera, they're going to do it. Now, it's interesting like this. He's born in 1756. Already at a young age of somewhere around 14, he's learning by the Noda B'Yehuda. The person who the Noda B'Yehuda wrote the most chuvas to is this Reb David Deitch, something like 40 chuvas. What's interesting is, I see in the Shem Oilam edition, they point out that the Maftechas didn't chap this, and they have 7 different entries for this same Reb David, because they didn't realize that different times the Noda B'Yehuda refers to him different ways. Anyway, not only is he close with, he's a Talmud Muvak by the Noda B'Yehuda, he also develops already way back a relationship with the Chassam Sofer. So my friend Moaz Khan, in his book on the Chassam Sofer, also deals with the relationship between the Chassam Sofer and David Deitch. His son-in-law is the Maram Ash, which we spoke about earlier, who had the minig, he was saying over the minig of his shver. So it's interesting that they both had the same minig of learning Masechta Shevuos during Sfira. And it's interesting is that it seems it's possible that the Chassam Sofer might have even given a hesped at the Levaya. There's some type of Maifah story that they bring down in this edition of El David, which has in it a very nice job of history about him. And just to mention one fascinating thing is that in all his copies of his farm, he used to write Ha'aris and Isafas. So this Mechon somehow saw 50 different Oyel Davids of his Chibur with Isafas in different ones, and they collected it and with other materials. Okay. Anyway, fast forward, the Chassam Sofer, also at the same time, he learned Masechta Shevuos, Ki Yadua. So Mechon Chassam Sofer, as they do incredible work always, they have a whole long list in Hagdama, how they piece together from all the different years, when he learned this, when he learned that, and they even note the different Mahalchei Limud in the different years of his Sefer. Okay, Gevaldik, fine. Another Chashav Yid, this Dar, was Reb Leib Berlin, brother of the Atzei Amoigim. So Reb Nosson Rabinovich in the Dikduke Seifrim writes, Ein erech to the notes of this great Reb Leib Berlin. The Ein Neufeles Mehagois of Reb Yishaya Berlin. He gave to Shas Vilna, when they published their Shas, they were always looking for new materials. He gave them the materials of Reb Leib Berlin. It's 3 pages, but as you can see over here, he's saying there's a very special. And if you want to read more about Reb Leib Berlin, look in Rabbi Hamburger's work, HaYeshiva Rama B'Fiyarda. Mirz Hashem, one day we'll get to him. Just to mention very fast, 4 other svarim. Number 1, the Yad Yehuda, which we quoted earlier, he had the Ksav Yad of the Ritva that Shlomo has. So he dies in 1761 at the age of 34, but Lamais's Chibur was only published much later on, 1816. Recently, some of works of his somehow he had Talmidim already, even though he dies at 34. And one of his tremendous Talmidim, the Baal Shar Sheyayam, there's a Mechon called Hadras Kodesh, has been working on publishing this stuff. They did a beautiful job of the Chuvas, and they did his work on Be'ah. Okay, the great Chichrei Lev from Rafal Yosef Chazan, who dies in 1820, Yadua for his massive work called Chichrei Lev. He has a Chibur on Masechta Shevuos, which is published for the first time in 1875. As I'm always very fond of mentioning, what about Volozhin? So here we have the Netziv gives a date in 1849. That's when he in 1849 we know that Volozhin was learning Masechta Shevuos, the whole Masechta, and we have that. It's interesting is that Keseder, he quotes his work on the Sifri, and it wasn't published at that time. And I believe I once quoted the Lashon of Rav Kook asking, this is in the late 1880s, Rebbe, when are you going to publish your massive work on the Sifri? But he always referenced it in Shir. That's how they always knew about it. And one other work, the Litvischer work from Rav Betzalel, wrote on many Masechtas. We quoted Meleches Betzalel. He has on this Masechta too, and in a volume that I'm very fond of quoting from Rav Tzipesa Frank, of the letters between him and his son, he was always asking him to get the different works of this Reb Betzalel. So there's that also. And just to conclude, halacha is that what's the story with halacha Masechta Shevuos? So the Aruch HaShulchan Ki Yodua Nedarim was missing, and then it was found a bunch of years ago. So the end Hilchos Shevuos, there's parts that relate to Hilchos Shevuos. There's a massive chibur on Kol Nidre that I've quoted in the past. This work has materials also related to Shevuos, and to conclude, the Munkacher Rebbe of today published the Darkei Tshuva, continuing by himself, Alpi the Mahalach of the Darkei Tshuva, based on thousands of Tshuvas for him, blah, blah, blah. And it has, the volume is Nedarim and Shevuos, and that's available, Mamish just came out relatively recently. So this is just some of the materials on this Masechta. So as one could see, once again, the theme that I've been pretty much showing consistently throughout the generations, our generation, by the time, the amount of material, it's well possible to learn this Masechta, penetrate it. There's so much material, whether it's from the Rishonim, there's plenty of Achroinim, there's what to do. So when you're bored and you finish the daf, you have what to look at and go delve into.
Thank you, Rabbi Doctor. Thank you for the sponsorship. Thank you for talking about everything else that's going on in the world of Rabbi Dr. Eliezer Brut. And of course, visit EliezerBrut.com, see what else Rabbi Brut is up to, and feel free to reach out to myself and or to Rabbi Brut to partner with us in bringing this to the masses. Thank you.